All right. So we've been hearing a lot about the trucker convoy. We've been hearing a lot about the shift in power that has resulted in the trucker convoy data being leaked from Give, Send, Go. And I think today I'm going to talk a little bit about that topic. It's something that I think is very important because there's this whole domain of hacktivism. What is hacktivism? How is it being used, and how does it impact our democracy, and how does it impact our decisions? We have a special background today, the Matrix background, because when I think about hacktivism, that's what I think about. Is I think about the Matrix, and I think about how people essentially are trying to create change using computer technology. And so let's dive into hacktivism. So the first thing I want to cover today, and I have several different topics. So I'm going to cover a little bit about Give, Send, Go. So we'll talk a little bit about the lessons that we learned from Give, Send, Go. We'll talk a little bit about what is hacktivism. What is hacktivism, and how is it used? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about shifting power because I think it has a big role to play in shifting power. And so, just a little bit of background on myself. Uh, I'm Dr. Ed. I'm just a geek dad who's obsessed about the future. My PhD is in computer science, and I remember when there was a computer science course offered in the Department of Computer Science. It was the first one specifically about hacking, right? Is specifically about, finding exploits, what's the principles behind it. And I remember at the time there were companies in Calgary that said that if you do this, we will not hire any graduates, computer science graduates from your university. It created quite a stir. I remember reading about it on Slashdot. And people were like, what? Like, what's the big deal if people know about this? And the reality is, like, a lot of times what we describe as a hack is not really a hack. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in the future because things are changing in that space. So, what happened? Let's talk a little bit about Give, Send, Go, okay? And I think I want to talk about it from the technical side. I want to talk about like what is actually happening on the technology side. And the reason I don't actually call it like the original issue was not like because it was hacked. The original issue was because the company itself didn't even do the basics for managing the information security and privacy of their own users. And so this was a major lapse on the part of the company. And instead of actually dealing with the issue, they just decided to blame other people. And then this just led to way more problems. So let's dive into that. Let's see. Gamma. Okay, so I'm going to show you something. And let's see how can I bring this up so it's easy for you to see. So this TechCrunch article, I want to say, okay, here we go. Okay, so essentially, this TechCrunch article says that the donation site for the Ottawa Truckers' Freedom Convoy protest exposed donors' data. Now, this was on February the 8th, so like over a week ago, right? So they actually had quite a bit of time to look at it. And in this article, what they said is that there were 50 gigabytes of personally identifiable data, including passport scans and driver's licenses, that was reported to be publicly accessible on the Amazon Web Services S3 server used by Give, Send, Go on February the 8th, 2022. Now, to be clear, accessing this personally identifiable information did not require any hacking of the site. The site owners just made that directory listable and accessible to the public. So this isn't like, oh, somebody goes and hacks your site. The listing of the directory is what exposed all of the files on the server. Now, we don't exactly know how long the bucket was left exposed, but a text file left behind by an unnamed security researcher was dated September 2018. And it warned that the bucket was not properly configured, which could have dangerous security implications. So, this suggests that personal information had been exposed for at least 4 years. 4 years on Give, Send, Go. And I think that this is what happens. Like, this is, I want to be clear, guys, this is negligence on the part of Give, Send, Go. It just makes it really easy for anybody to access this information. It makes it easy for government authorities to track down the donors. And it's going to impact donations and how safe people feel online for a very long time. The fact is, even 2 days later, another source with access to the same data explained to the Daily Dot that the Give, Send, Go appeared to only remove the ability to view the index. So all they did is they went into the S3 server and they said, don't make it possible to list. But they still made every single file accessible, publicly accessible. And so they didn't disable any direct access to the files themselves. So the Daily Dot was able to view multiple files, including, and not limited to, a scan of an individual's social security card. So this is US information, as well as multiple military identifications. So if you gave a military identification in order to create a Give, Send, Go, guess what? It got leaked, sorry. The sensitive information that's also accessible appears to be from users who set up campaigns that includes photos of their credit cards. Like their credit card photo is there. Their voter IDs are there, their permanent resident cards, and even a police commissioner's identification ID. So, can you imagine? Like the amount of information that is being leaked here is absolutely insane. You know what? The Daily Dot even did the next step, which was to reach out to Give, Send, Go. So they reached out to them directly to inquire about this security issue. And they were told by Give, Send, Go that previous reporting on this issue was fake news. Like literally, this is the CEO of Give, Send, Go saying, oh, it's fake news, which also indicates that this individual was trying to like bury the news story as much as possible. Not really addressing the issue head on. And this is a huge breach, right? Like the amount of information, personal information that was leaked. And they're like, oh, no, it didn't actually happen. The response from Wells, who is the owner of Give, Send, Go, said, yeah, there might be the potential that a campaign owner uploaded an ID to a public gallery and did not properly remove it. But that would be on the campaign owner who uploaded it. I want to be clear, when he said that it's on the campaign owner, this is false. This is not true. It is not the campaign owner or the person who gives you the information. It's not their job in order to ensure that they delete the information. It is your job to make sure that it is secured. Right? So when people give you information, there is an agreement, typically through a privacy or a data processing agreement that says that if you are handling any personally identifiable information, like you require their information in order to start a campaign, you must be responsible for securing it. And also you must have some way of notifying individuals in the event of a breach. And this would qualify as that. And so there were some major, major missteps that happened here from a privacy perspective. And in addition, as a result, like the Daily Dot was also able to confirm that some of these IDs match those who set up the campaigns. And so it's like, yeah, we actually know that this is like the people who set up the exact campaign that we're talking about here. So this is frightening data, and I feel that increasingly we need to. This is something we need to pay a lot more attention to whenever it comes to the giving of people's personally identifiable information. So this data was later provided to the journalism collective called DDoS Secrets on Thursday. And given the sensitivity of the data, DDoS Secrets announced that it would only be providing access to this information to journalists and researchers. So DDoS Secrets said that they were provided with at least 1,000 images that they deemed were of sensitive information. Now, later, the site actually was redirected with information that made like details of the donators, the people who donated to the campaign, explicitly accessible. So somebody, it sounds like somebody with like an FTP. Basically, how do you redirect a site? Isn't too hard if you have write access. And it looks like this is a server that like was not like, it was just a directory. Imagine it like your main website is just like an open directory. Anybody on the internet can upload anything. It doesn't feel like this was a hard hack, but it sounds like somebody could just like FTP upload a different URL to point you to a different site. And this site, I think a lot of you may have seen it, but if you haven't, maybe I'll just point you to it. But I need to turn off the sound because I don't want the sound playing on this one. Give me a sec. Oh, no, the sound is off. Okay, good. So this is what the site looks like right here. So this is the Give, Send, Go site. This is just some screen cap of it. And it says like some stuff about the insurrection, but you can see on the bottom here, and this is really important, they had raw donation data for the Freedom Convoy 2022 in CSV format. So in a comma separated value format, you could essentially access all of that personally identifiable information. Though this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Like your site was manipulated, was hacked, and your data was released. And in this, I believe that at the end of this video, they also start listing off specific individuals that were deemed to have leaked this information, right? So details, and now for our most generous sponsors. And so they list like the people who are at the top of the donation list, right? So it is all there. And so it's surprising, right? Like that all of this information was there. This is I don't want to go into too much of the details because essentially it's a lot of personal information, right? And they are making this available at scale. And I wanted to emphasize that I don't necessarily like. So essentially, we're playing with the law and we're playing with the rules here. And so, in order to understand what is really going on, the full scale of this, we need to understand a little bit about hacktivism. Okay, so what is hacktivism, right? Like, what is this term? Where does this term come from? And how would you describe hacktivism? And I think this is something that increasingly we're going to need to be very familiar with. And so hacktivism is just like a combination or portmanteau of two words, hack and activism, right? So hacktivism. And it's just the use of computer-based techniques such as hacking as a form of civil disobedience in order to promote a political agenda or social change. So it has like roots in, of course, hacker culture and hacker ethics. And its ends are often related to things connected to free speech. So free speech is a big component of hacktivism. Human rights is another aspect of it. And then freedom of information movements is another one. Um, and so I'll be referring to this Wikipedia article a little bit more. Now, of course, hacktivism is a controversial term, of course, with several different meanings. The word was coined to characterize like this electronic direct action working towards social change by combining programming skills with critical thinking. But just as a hack can sometimes mean a cyber crime, hacktivism can be used to mean activism that is malicious. So just like an activist can become a rioter, right? Like hacktivism can also be destructive, and it can undermine the security of the internet as a technical, economic, and political platform. And so what it means is that hacktivism is a tool, right? It is neither good nor bad. It really depends on how it is used. And often I see hacktivism as something that people see as trying to like level the playing field. There is all of this money going to this platform, and there's all of this anonymity. So this group has a lot of power, and we want to level the playing field. So we're going to release the information so that everybody has this level of power. And there are many different types of hacktivism. For example, you can use code. So, for example, you can achieve political goals by encrypting things using PGP, for example. Or you like nowadays, people use different types of email lists that can use Tor in order to anonymize the IP address of the sender. So those are examples. Um, and so I think PGP, it's interesting. PGP's author, Phil Zimmerman, said he distributed this as like a peace movement when uh, senators, there was a Senate Bill 266 authored by Senators Biden and DeConcini, which demanded that communications systems permit the government to obtain the plain text contents of voice, data, and other communications. So, WikiLeaks is an example of a politically motivated website that uh, seeks to keep governments open, and it does this by like sending encrypted files and allowing these leaks to go through. Another approach is something known as mirroring. So mirroring is instead of like encrypting the files, making it difficult to access for others, mirroring is like website mirroring is a circumvention tool that's used to bypass some censorship or blocks on websites. I don't know if you remember, there was a hacktivist who hacked into the JSTOR database, the academic database, in order to get access to all of the academic research. And this concept was that, oh, well, it's not fair. Like all of these individuals are paying money to sponsor all of this government funded research, and then we don't have access to it because we don't have a membership to your site. This is ridiculous. And so I'm going to hack the JSTOR database, I'm going to get all of the papers from it, and I'm going to make it publicly accessible. And this was not met kindly. Like this individual who was involved, oh man, I got to pull this up. I cannot just talk about this. Hacked JSTOR database. Yeah, Aaron Schwartz. This was a big deal because, like, this person, Aaron Schwartz, was pursued by the government very heavily, and he eventually took his own life as a result of this. So it's serious stuff, guys. So this is TNR. Okay, so in this article, yeah, boom. So this is Aaron Schwartz. He broke into the MIT and he accessed JSTOR, which is where all of the academic papers were. And essentially, the government pursued him relentlessly, and ultimately, he did like take his own life as a result of this. But so we don't know all the details, but essentially, this is it's pretty serious stuff. Like, so when people are talking about mirroring, like that's what they mean by mirroring. Okay, so Aaron Schwartz is an example of somebody who tried to mirror a database. There are also major mirroring art projects like the Internet Archive. So they have like the ability to like see the Internet Archive or Wikisource. There are different types of ways of archiving the internet, and that's often used. So if the site is missing something, you just go to the archive. Let's say it got deleted. Well, some web crawler has probably taken a copy of it already. Another tool used by hacktivists is anonymity. So it's like a method of speaking out to like a wide range of human rights issues, government oppression. You just, I think it's been referred to on Twitter as a sock puppet account. I know this is a term that is sock puppet account. Yes, here it is. Okay. So I don't know. Oh, yes, here. So essentially, it's just like creating a fake account that's going to be used specifically for the purposes of like posting things on the internet. This is an example of a sock puppet account. So it's an alternative online identity used for the purposes of deception. Um, and it comes from the writings of Walt Whitman and Anthony Burgess, who wrote pseudonyms. And pseudonyms have been around like for a long time. And so, person who's controlled by another, um, and then a long history of sock puppetry. Wikimedia Foundation condemned paid advocacy sock puppeting on Wikipedia 2 days later, specifically banned wiki PR editing. And so the WMF just uncovered another group of sock puppets known as Orange Moody. So really, it's just like you create a fake account basically, and you try to post things specifically to talk about like human rights issues or government oppression, those types of things. So often, like a sock puppet account is what's used to leak personally identifiable information, like especially for hacktivists. So if they're going to leak information, that's typically how it would be done. The goal is to use disposable email accounts. So yeah, you'll find an email, but it won't point to anybody. You use some kind of IP masking, like a VPN, so you won't be able to track that person very easily. And you'll use some kind of blogging software to preserve this higher level of anonymity. So it would be really hard to find out who that is. The another method is known as doxing. Doxing is just the practice of taking that private and confidential information and documents and leaking them. They're made public. And so doxing is kind of what happened at the end of that video, where people would give you the email address or the phone number of an individual who was, like, say, the biggest donor in that area. Hacktivists often view this form of assured transparency, but experts, of course, they're the ones who are saying that this is basically a type of harassment. And I want to be clear, like, this isn't something that is legal. You can't just leak the information of individuals, like dox them. It does have ramifications, but I noticed that from what I've seen, there's been very little legal ramifications for individuals. It has been more like public sentiment, like public outrage when people do this has been the biggest consequence that I've seen. And the reason for this is we have, and I talked about this a little bit last time, was that we have really lax privacy laws. And essentially the people who like leak this data, the consequences in general have been fairly small, although with the GDPR in the European Union, things are changing. And of course, there are uh, denial of service, or they call them DOS attacks. Um, DOS attacks basically use a large amount of like personal or public computers that hackers take control of using usually typically malware transmitted through things like emails or a website link that you click on. Often they're like, hey, click on this link. um, that what they're trying to do is install some kind of malware so that they can use it for DDoS attacks in the future. And so once they have control of your computer, then essentially they it's like controlling this like herd of zombies, and essentially you can redirect network traffic to just one website. And the whole point of this is just to the purpose is to overload the servers, and that effectively takes the website offline because the server can only handle so many people at the same time. If a bunch of people start accessing it all simultaneously, then you will no longer have access to that website, so you'll take down the website. You can actually do the same thing using something called a virtual sit-in, and that's essentially taking a large number of protesters and doing the same thing. So if you get a bunch of friends and they're all going to hit that website and they're just going to keep reloading that web page, it would effectively cause the same type of like load onto that website and would likely overwhelm it and then slow the site down to take it offline. There's other things that people do, like in the example with the ELSA, like that's a website defacement. So they just infiltrate the web server and then they just replace the web page with maybe a redirect to some different page. And so that website redirect is a pretty common technique used by hacktivists. There's other techniques, like for example, like geobombing, which is just tagging a particular location over and over again. That you can like link it to some kind of site or some video or something, and then that seems to be what appears when you go and visit. But I think that there's different techniques that people use depending on like if it's location based or not. In this case, with Give Send Go, it was not. And so, really, I want to get into, okay, so I hope that makes sense. And of course, if you have any questions, like, I didn't understand this, there's something that I didn't get, well, then just post your question inside the chat. So we just finished a little bit about the lessons learned from Give, Send, Go. Give, Send, Go. And then we also did a little bit about what is hacktivism. So let me know, do you have any questions? I can see there's a few on Amazon. There's a few online as well on Twitch. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, just post it. I am always happy to answer them. We are live for this reason. So hacktivism. So I hope that gives some perspective on what hacktivism is. And I want to talk about, okay, so how does that, okay, let's say we do have hacktivism. How does that impact, what is the impact of that on our democracy? And to me, I still feel that the Eric Liu's content on power is very relevant, probably more relevant than we like to think. And so let's dive into that, okay? So I want to show you a video, and this is going to be a recap for anybody who's seen my stuff before. We lost power. Oops. Is there audio playing? Okay. Yes, how to understand power. So give me a sec while I go through this. I want to talk a little bit about, so there's an impact here of power, and really what is power is a shift. It's a shift of power. And to understand this, we need to understand the three laws of power. And so that's what I'm going to cover now, if you will permit me. And I think the reason that this is really important is because it covers so much of what what hacktivism is all about and what they are trying to, what is their means, what are they trying to achieve. And when you understand this, then a lot of what hacktivism is very much connected to the activism side. And so let's jump into it. Here we go.
Examining. Law number 1, power is never static. It's always either accumulating or decaying in the civic arena. So if you aren't taking action, you're being acted upon. Law number 2, power is like water. It flows like a current through everyday life. Politics is the work of harnessing that flow in a direction you prefer. Policymaking is an effort to freeze and perpetuate a particular flow of power. Policy is power frozen. Law number 3, power compounds. Power begets more power, and so does powerlessness. The only thing that keeps law number 3 from leading to a situation where only one person has all the power is how we apply laws 1 and 2. What rules do we set?
Okay, so that was really brief, and I don't want to go too much into it. But law number 3 of power was that power is constantly going to those who already have power, right? So power accumulates. And the only things that keep power in check are laws 1 and 2. One is that power is never static. It never just stays in one place. That person does not stay powerful forever. And so if you think about activism and you think about hacktivism, hacktivism is a law number 1. Its goal is to ensure that power is never static. It doesn't always stay in one place. And so what they do by taking the information of those who, let's say, donated to the Give, Send, Go, is they take the power of the anonymity that like Give, Send, Go would never explicitly give that information out, and they're giving it to the general public. They're giving it to the authorities, the government. They're giving it to people online so that like they can name and shame those particular companies so that there is a financial impact on those individuals. So what does that mean? That means that with the announcement of the Emergency Powers Act in Canada, that these individuals could have their bank accounts frozen. They could have their bank accounts frozen. They could have their insurance canceled, right? And these are very, very expensive equipment, like $250,000 for your typical truck. Any kind of damages to it, they're not insured anymore. You can't get a bank account. I mean, this is serious consequences for those individuals, but only if and only if you knew who they are. And this is the key, is that power was given to those who were anonymous because they felt in the same way that, like, this was the whole like argument with the mass, was that they could be free of consequences. The anonymity of nobody knows who they are, right? Nobody knows who donated to the Give, Send, Go. So as a result of this anonymity that they believed that they had, they could continue contributing to this. And so this is leading to a huge amount of public backlash. And you can be sure that the public is going to be holding those individuals accountable. And we have seen this as well in the past. There have been organizations that have looked at the those who funding the January 6 riots. I want to say, what is it called? What is that company called? Accountability. I want to say, oh, here it is. It's Citizens for Ethics. So essentially, once this information is available, then you're going to find companies such as the Citizens for Ethics, or they call themselves CREW, See if I can bring this up a little bit more. Yeah. So essentially, they find out, all right, who was funding all of these individuals. They create like visualizations. They go, these are the companies that contributed. This is how much money they contributed. These are the donors, and these are the sedition caucus members. So these are all of the members who were funding it. So you can make that information very explicit. And in addition, once you have that, you can list out who the top corporate donors are. That's fairly straightforward. And you can find that even things like timelines, they like a company, you keep them accountable. You go, okay, on this day, you called the attack horrific and you promised to reevaluate. And a month later, you started giving to seditionists again. Ha ha. Like, let's keep you accountable. And so within a month, you've already poured $9,000 into the pockets of 9 members. And so it was after a bunch of pushback from crew, Toyota stops giving to seditionists. By then, they had given a total of $89,500 to 51 members of Congress. So this, visualizations, what happened? What did they say that they would do? And so you can see the impact that they have. We draw those timelines, make it visual, provide information, and keep people accountable. That is a big shift. That's a big shift in power from, oh, I'm anonymous and I can donate to whatever platform I want to. No, no, you cannot. Anonymity is actually extremely hard to obtain on the internet. And we can talk a little bit more about like ways that people are trying to like obtain anonymity. I would say the biggest method right now is the cryptocurrency. So people are using like Bitcoin, for example, in order to fund the Freedom Convoy. And that's trickier to first get Bitcoin, to acquire the Bitcoin. And it's also trickier to like anonymize your IP and stuff like that. So it requires a little bit more technical expertise, but it's not impossible. Like anybody can do it. I think nowadays, like masking IPs are becoming easier and easier. And once you've masked the IP, I don't know, like it's surprisingly difficult to trace people after that. So something to consider. And people are like looking at using different platforms for messaging and stuff. So it's good to keep in mind. And so I would say that groups like Anonymous, they have like a brand. They're wearing the Guy Fawkes masks. They will often say like, "Hey, we're pushing for this," and they'll say why. And I think that that's a big part of the hacktivism theater. Like you have to explain the mission, like what you're trying to do, rather than just seeing, oh, something got hacked. And in this case, yes, they can create some positive change in areas. They can say like, hey, we're not okay with the January 6th riots. We're going to start exposing the individuals, the companies that started to sponsor that. We're going to find out who they are, and we are going to make that information public. This is their call. This is their prerogative. And so this is a type of hacktivism. And so they're also working with a type of power, which is anonymity, right? They call themselves anonymous. And so just keep in mind, like there are many, like it's just a shift. It's that power is never static. It constantly ebbs and flows. And the objective of this type of power, the hacktivism, is to shift the power so that there could be a change in the policy side. And so by enabling people with that data, it allows governments to change their policies to say, oh, we know who you are, by the way. And guess what? We are going to shut down your bank accounts and we're going to cancel your insurance. You're going to have serious long-term financial consequences for your actions in this blockade of the Canada-US border. And so the more we start to see this type of hacktivism, the more people I think are becoming aware of how important the data side is for everything that we do. Data is essentially where a lot of our intents, our actions are stored, but they're not only stored, but they're stored permanently. Or I would say, yeah, like indefinitely would be the best description. Like, think about this. You've donated one time to Give, Send, Go, to the Freedom Convoy. Well, guess what happened with that data? Yeah, it was stored on the Give, Send, Go Amazon S3 server, but that server got hacked. And not only did it get hacked, all of the information got downloaded and it got mirrored on a different site, specifically for the purpose of leaking it to other people. And after it was leaked out, now other people have this information forever, right? And they're going to keep your company accountable indefinitely, right? So there's a Calgary company, Canadian Natural Resources Limited, CNRL, has like a stock, and they issued a statement. It's like, oh, it wasn't from us. Well, people are going to be aware of there was a donation from that location, from that IP address. And so they're going to be watching it very closely, and they're going to be keeping accounts. And so they'll be asking, okay, so you say that you don't support these individuals. Well, who do you donate to politically? What kind of accountability and transparency is there on that? Transparency is something that really shifts power because it brings to the public awareness the things that are not right, the imbalances that exist, the injustices, inequities, all of the donations that are happening behind the scenes. When you get some visibility into what happens behind the scenes, you start to see how broken things really are. And then the general public advocates for change, and then we see policy change. And so these are the checks and balances that exist in a democracy in order to ensure that we are keeping each other accountable, that people are taking actions, but they're taking actions with some level of accountability. I mean, in the same way, we could ask, okay, well, what's the accountability for those who exposed the Give, Send, Go? And that's a good question, right? Like, there are like news outlets, for example, that were involved, or there was like media companies. And I feel like to a certain extent, yeah, you could go after them. And this has happened before, right? I remember Peter Thiel. Who did he go after? Peter Thiel, like down Gawker. Yep. So some of you remember this. So there are consequences for even the companies that go after, like, trying to leak information out about individuals, particularly like well-funded individuals such as Peter Thiel. So in this example, Peter Thiel just got his wish. Gawker is shutting down. The end of Gawker is also the end of an era in the web's short history. And so essentially, like, these companies or these individuals with power or with finances can essentially fund things against that media organization forever, right? Like indefinitely. Oh, there's somebody who's suing you. Well, maybe I can help fund those individuals. But what you cannot do, and this is becoming more clear day by day, is expect to remain anonymous forever. Eventually, the people are going to find out one way or another. And so you have to ask the question of, if the actions that I'm doing online today are going to be leaked out to the media and made available to everyone on Twitter tomorrow, is this something that I would be comfortable with everybody knowing about me or knowing about my company? Is this something that I really want to have out there? And if not, you have to think about the liability, the long-term liability for companies of exposing this information, because once it's out there, you can't take it back. right? Like there's the Streisand effect, right? The Barbara Streisand tried to shut somebody down by filing like a cease and desist, and it just made it bigger, right? Like the thing that she wanted to hide. Otherwise, it would have been a like a no big deal kind of story. She just made it. She blew it up, and that's essentially what this is doing. Is essentially blowing things up. When we try to keep things anonymous, it makes individuals very, very curious. And they want to know who is donating to this. This is a question that burns in people's minds. And so they're going to find out. And when they do find out, that information is going to become a scandal. It's going to become a huge news story. And with AI parenting, that has been my focus. Is I want to look at the insides of companies. I want to look at the insides of how they are actually developed. And I want to be able to look at shifting that power, right? So I want to see if parents are aware of, like, say, how the AI works for all of the internet interactions that they have that are not rated by the ESRB, then what should they look like? What would be something that we would be comfortable with? And I feel that increasingly we need to expect this level of accountability from companies. Just thinking that you're anonymous is not going to work. Is not going to work long term. And so that's why I'm really encouraged by like kind of where we're going for AI parenting, this direction. And of course, if you have any questions, so we just covered shift in power. So that was the last section, shifting power. And of course, so I have our site. It's aiparenting.live. And so I'll show you what that looks like. So our site is called AI Parenting Live. And here, I have an email list that you can just sign up for if you want to get some updates. You can just check sign up here, or you can apply to be an AI Parenting Insider just at the bottom of the page. You just put your first name and your email address. And really, we want to make it easier, so you can just like be an insider. You can apply here. And I have some online courses that specifically talk about moving from screen time to quality time. And I'm here to also mention that I want to help out companies that are trying to avoid cancel culture, or they're already in it and they are trying to get out of cancel culture. And my perspective has been one that you cannot solve it on your own. You have to go outside. Like what your internal policies is what got you into this mess in the first place. And so your internal policies are not going to be able to get you out of this mess. You need to have somebody else on the outside who is looking at the reconciliation process. And I had heard of a really good example of that just this weekend. I was learning about anti-racism, and I heard from a speaker who said that there was a racist article inside a newspaper. It was a cartoon, right? Somebody made a racist cartoon, and it was specifically against Asian individuals. And as you know, like there's a lot of anti-Asian racism that's happening, especially right now. I was surprised at how quickly, like, we went from give, send, go to, oh, it's China's fault. It's Chinese people's fault. I'm like, what? Like, we had nothing to do with this. But then, of course, like we got blamed almost immediately. And in this case, there was a cartoon. It was written about Asian people, and highly racist. And so there was somebody from the Chinese community who went up to this newspaper and wrote a statement. It's like, we think that this is like highly offensive. We believe that you need to do these kinds of things in order to reconcile for what you've done. And they they just followed those directions. And that's the difference, is when you get the people who are impacted to come up with the type of reconciliation that will be done, it's way easier for you. But I don't know why, but people don't seem to be learning this, right? Like, it just seems like Joe Rogan is digging deeper every single time. It feels like companies like Give, Send, Go are just digging deeper into themselves in order to, like, oh, the solution is internal. This is a mistake. Don't make this mistake. You just make things worse for your own company and for your own brand. And increasingly, people want to know what a brand stands for, and it is these actions. How they do anything is how they do everything, and that's what people are learning very quickly what they are missing. And so, once again, I want to thank you for joining. There's a couple books that I'd like to recommend. I like the Coming Swarm. It just talks about like crowds and the impact of things like crowdfunding, but also like cancel culture, right? Like the public outrage, manufacturing consent. Some of the techniques that are used is very interesting. Like, you can create a bunch of fake accounts in order to promote certain types of keywords and things to appear at the top if you want. So there are ways that the public discourse is being manipulated online just using this type of manufactured consent. Like, a bunch of bots could essentially do that. Coding democracy. So I mentioned before how data is the new vote, coding is the new law, AI is the new law. So these are reasons why everybody needs to know AI. A is for anonymous. This is more just like a story, backstory of it. And of course, Eric Liu's "You're More Powerful Than You Think." So a lot of like really big books. And if there's anything that I've shared today, it's just standing on the shoulders of giants. Like I said, I'm just a geek dad who's obsessed about the future. I wanted to share some of the insights that I have from my background with a PhD in computer science. And I think that if we start to understand that this isn't just hacktivism isn't just a tech thing. It isn't just coders. It is a shifting of power. I think we're going to be much better off to understand that technology and our society is very much entwined, and understanding how hacktivism is used is a very important aspect for every company. You need to know that they're going to be after you, and you need to know that data is going to leak, and you don't want data to leak, then don't store it in the first place. Don't store it in the first place. When I look at privacy regulations, the more I see, it's like the more data that you have, like the more stuff that's going to get out there. So don't store it, right? Or if you have it, then delete it immediately, right? After it's verified. They didn't do that, right? Like 4 years, and like the information is still there. This is terrible information security practice. Terrible. But it happens. They're not the only company. Give, Send, Go is not the only one that has information security, cybersecurity practices that are non-existent, right? Like, literally, you could just view the directory. Here's every single file out there. But this is more common than we think. And so, with that, I've got to run. Appreciate you. Thank you very much. If you want to learn a little bit more, AIparenting.live. Go and check it out. Sign up for the email lists. And if you want, just get in contact with me, right? edwardc.com/now is a way to get in contact with me. If you want to reach out, if there's anything that I can answer, or even if you just want something like a free consult, just let me know. Thank you, and I will speak to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.